Hello and welcome to the Kathleen Spraglin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. Well, except lately I've been on a teaching plan for Zettelkasten. I'm getting so many questions and responses that I've been off on a sidetrack that's gone on for a while now, and I'll continue as long as it's helping you. And you let me know that it's helping you by your questions and your comments. So as long as it's filling that purpose, I'm delighted to share with you. Well, today I ran into a really interesting situation that I wanted to share with you, and it's on the issue of, do we want to take bib notes and then create main cards? Or do we want to, in some instances, go straight to the main card without a bib card? And I ran into an interesting, a very practical example today of that while dipping into this tome, which I like to dive into from time to time. And this is Character Strengths and Virtues by Christopher Peterson and Martin Seligman. And it's, as you can tell, it's quite a hefty tome. And it's very related to the area that I'm interested in, which is human motivation as it informs the fiction writer. And I deal in character traits. Now, they're talking about character strengths. They're just on the positive pole of this because their field is positive psychology. Whereas a fiction writer, I need to not only have the gamut of strengths and weaknesses. As a fiction writer, I've got to have the whole broad spectrum there, where it includes all the way from hero to villain, the broadest possible spectrum of the character traits. Well, I ran into something really interesting. I've been taking bib notes all along, and every few pages I convert one into a main note. Well, today was an interesting situation where I'm going straight to main notes, and I'm going to switch over to my down-facing camera so I can show you what I ran into and why I made that choice. See you over there. I've been working on coming to terms with my authors, Peterson and Seligman, and they talk early on about wanting to have a taxonomy, but they end up settling simply for a classification. And then they broke their classification down into virtues as being the most abstract, character strengths as being on the path to virtues, and then situational themes that are very specific to individual isolated circumstances. Then they decide that their chief area of focus for the entire book is going to be on character strengths, which is the reason why I got the book in the first place, because it ties in so well with the character traits. I reached an interesting spot in the book. They gathered a whole target list of possible character strengths, and then having a number of them to work with, they studied them all and decided to establish a set of 10 criteria that they felt would be good guidelines for what should and should not be considered a character strength. Well, in the midst of discussing that very first criteria, and their very first criteria was that a strength contributes to life fulfillment that comes out of the character strength. And so they definitely wanted to have a sense of that life beyond oneself, something beyond the ordinary that comes about through these character strengths. Well, then they ended up with a list of 10 items that they said were possible criteria to determine something that they called a signature strength. Now, a signature strength is something that is intrinsic to the character. In my world, I would call that a base trait. It should be something that's at the ground form of the character. The character shouldn't have to think too much about the operation of that character trait. They're simply going to act in a positive way just as a part of who they are in a rather natural course of things. So I was rather interested to find out in this list of 10 criteria. So this is 10 criteria for a signature strength buried within the first criteria for a character strength. Very interesting. And the first one, so there's 10 of these. And when I glanced through them and read them, it was clear that many of these thoughts are not the kinds of thoughts that I have been bringing to character traits. And that, of course, is immediately very exciting, because if you get some new ways of thinking that you can then bounce off against your current ways of thinking, that can be enormously productive and can grow your theory very, very powerfully. So these I sensed would have very high value. So since they're very high value, I didn't want to suddenly make one card that said, oh, here's the 10 criteria for signature strengths, and go boom, 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 and list them. I felt that in point of fact, what I really needed to do was give each one of these items in the strengths due consideration and compare it against my other conversations that I've got going on in my Zettelkasten on these character traits. So to me, rather than saying, okay, I know I'm going to want all 10 of those. So rather than getting out a bib card and saying, okay, I'm going to go on card after card after card and just list them there, and then I'm going to turn right around and make main cards for them all. Well, to me, that seemed like rather a waste of extra energy, since I know in advance that I want to make main cards for each of these. So that's what I've decided to do. And when as you know, I always like to include in my main card, I like to make a note of what's the card address of the main card that came off of a given bib note. In this case, I'm going to have 10 of them, and I've already written the first one. Oops, I got the wrong number there. I've already written the first one in, except that should be a 2, not a 1. And I'm going to list all 10 of them in this block here. So let's take an interesting look. Since we're here, I wanted to take a look and share with you a little bit about this very first one. They talk about a signature strength. You should have a sense of ownership and authenticity. This is the real me as concerns that strength. And I thought to myself, that is rather interesting. You could say if it is the real me for the character, then it definitely qualifies as a base trait. And you would think that something that was a signature trait would certainly be a base trait. But there's this odd factor going on here, and that's that a base trait generally does not require any conscious thought. You act automatically. And once you have something that's going on in the conscious mind and is a conscious debate, immediately I'm thinking, well, that's a decision point. That's a rudder trait. That's not a base trait. That's a decisional point in the character's life, which is kind of the opposite of a signature strength. So, well, not quite an opposite. It's just, at least it's not the same as a signature strength. And so I compared it, for example, suppose you were talking about something such as sincerity in your relationships with others. If someone were to tell you, oh yes, sincerity is the real me, you would kind of doubt whether sincerity was the real them. In fact, you'd kind of put a little warning light. You'd kind of make a cautionary note in your mind. I don't know if I want to get to know that fellow or not. because you would think that if it was a question of, especially like being sincere in one's dealings with other individuals, that if you were to ask an individual who is genuinely has sincerity as a base trait, is sincerity the real you? That person would probably say, huh? Oh my goodness. Well, I hope so. Why? Did something come up? You see, they would never, if it was really a base trait, they wouldn't be plastering it on their forehead and saying, yes, this is the real me. So I'm going with them. I'm considering this a base trait, but it's an interesting question that is arising in my mind. And it's part of the reason why each one of these deserves its own spot in the Zettelkasten, because there's potential conversations here. And it's going to be very interesting in terms of the creation of an interesting story, how this ownership business is going to figure in. So I hope that gives you an idea of some of the flexibility that you have. You can always go straight from a book to a main card. My tendency is to make too many main cards when I go that route. I'm generally much better off first putting my notes onto a bib card and then transferring just the key ones to a main card. But when you know in advance that in a certain area you definitely want main cards from each of them, there's no reason why you can't go straight to the main card. That it's your Zettelkasten, and these guidelines are just to help you get the most out of your reading and the most out of your Zettelkasten. So it's part of the flexibility and the what I hope is the enjoyment that you're getting out of your Zettelkasten. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.